In this demo, I want to show you how you can use converters with bindings to change the value that gets set through a binding or to change the type entirely. For our first scenario, let's say that anytime you want to display negative numbers in a form, you want to put parentheses around them instead of showing the minus sign. That's something I can accommodate through a converter. So I'm going to go and add a class to my project here called negative number converter. To implement a converter, you're going to want it to be public so it can be called by the framework, and you're going to implement the iValueConverter interface. I can stub out the methods on that interface, and you can see that it has two methods, convert and convert back. Convert gets called as data is flowing from the source to the target. The value that is going to be set flows in here. It tells you what the type of the target property is that's going to be set, and it has an optional parameter and will tell you what culture it's being done in. So you can use converters to actually modify values for localization purposes. Convert back is called if you have two-way data binding and the value is being pushed down from the target down into the source object. So I'm going to replace this implementation with a fully fleshed out version. And you can see what the implementation does here is it's expecting this to only be hooked up to integers. Now to write a production-worthy one of these, you want to do a little more type checking and not just blindly cast the value here, which could blow up if it's not an integer. But here we're assuming we're only going to be hooked up to integers. We cast to an integer, and we check to see whether it's greater than or equal to 0. If so, we're just going to return it as a string. But otherwise, we're going to negate it here and put it in between parentheses using a string format. If we're going to support two-way data binding and allow people to enter negative numbers with parentheses around them, then the value is going to flow in here when they tab out of the field, or if you're using update source trigger equals property change. And we're going to look here and see if it starts with parentheses and ends with the parentheses. We're basically going to strip those off and negate the value that's there to return the negative integer down to the source object. Now to use this converter, I need to create an instance of it and use it in a binding. So I'm going to go over to my main window and I'm going to go to its resources section. And the way you'll typically use a converter is by creating an instance of it in your resources collection and give it a key. Then you can refer to it in a binding using a static resource. So then we're going to drop down in the form here to the field that we have that's a numeric value such as an age. And we're going to use the converter property, say static resource, grab the key name of our converter as we defined it up above, and pass that as the key in the static resource. So that's going to pull in a reference to that converter and basically invoke it anytime data is flowing from the source to the target. It's going to call the convert method, and then if we edit this and push a value down through, it's going to invoke the convert back method on that converter. With that in place, we can go back here to where our customer is being initialized, and we'll set it as -35 there. And I'll go over to the age property on my customer object and set a breakpoint so we can see when it's being set, what it's being set to. We'll go ahead and start up. And it'll be called here one time as it's initializing, and we see it renders out with parentheses instead of the -35. And if we put in some other values such as 99 and tab out of the field, our set block gets called and the current value is -99. So it strips off those parentheses and turns it into an actual negative integer. Now as another example, let's say we want to set a style based on a Boolean property in our model. I'm going to add a bool to style converter. And I'll quickly flesh out the implementation. You can see what this is doing is it's doing a little more type checking. So it's saying if the target type is a style and the input is a Boolean, then that's what this thing was designed to do. Otherwise, it's just going to blindly return the value and say this converter doesn't know what to do with that. And for a starting point here, it's going to say I could hard code here a style name of true style and false style corresponding to those Boolean values, and go use a helper method here to reach out to my application resources and get the style by name out of my resource dictionary. Then I'm just going to return that as the value that actually gets set on the target of the binding. Based on that code, I'll need those styles to exist, so I'll go out here to my application resources and pop in a name style called true style and false style. They're just going to set the foreground to red for true and black for false. Now to use that in my application, I would go to my main window, to the resources, and create an instance of that converter and give it a name. And then on the control that I wanted to use it on, such as my text box, I would set the style property using a binding. So the value that's going to come out of the converter is a style, but the input is a Boolean. So I'm pointing to a Boolean property on my model called premium customer, and then I'm using my converter instance to convert that Boolean value into a style value. That in place, I can go ahead and run. And we can see that Joe is red right now because it is a premium customer. If I uncheck it, it goes to black and back to red. Now, obviously, hard coding style names down inside some code like this is not a great idea. And that's where this object parameter can come in. You can pass converter parameters to a converter to drive its behavior. So if I modify that implementation a little bit, and I expect my parameter to be a semicolon separated pair of style names, I can split that out into an array and then use the first one as my true style and the second one as my false style. Now I can just go back to where I was binding the style and add another property on my binding called converter parameter and pass that value, which is going to be true style, semicolon, false style. That in place, the same behavior is manifest. It's red now, goes to black when I uncheck the premium customer property. But now this bool to style converter is a little more reusable because you can pass in those two different styles that it supports as a parameter when you use the converter. The one downside to be aware of is when you use a converter parameter, the values will have to be statically expressible in the code here. And that's the basics of using converters.